okay to start. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's edition of the Vdriven Masterclass. My name is Wade Yenny. I'm the Vice President of Brand Management and Business Development for Vdriven. For those of you not familiar with our company, we work with emerging brands and established brands in a number of ways, including consulting, strategy, deduction management, accounting services, as well as sales and brand management or brokering services. So we're glad that you're joining us here today. These classes are something we do once a month with different topics each month. So we're grateful for your attendance, and it would encourage you to certainly follow along with the presentation. We're going to leave some space after the presentation for your questions. So I'd encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And as we finish the presentation, we'll get to those questions. So just let them go in the chat. I'll monitor the questions and then bring them up as we get into the question portion of the program. So right now, I'm going to introduce to you Vdriven CEO, founder Luke Abbott, who's going to be guiding the presentation. Luke, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's a good-sized crowd, and I'm excited to share a new metric that I've been thinking about for over a decade, and I've really spent the time to figure out how to really articulate it, and you're the first ones ever to hear me talk about it, and excited to share it with you. I believe it'll change the way or enhance the way that you look at marketing and promotional spending. So let me first off introduce myself. For those of you, I know there's a few new names there that haven't met me. I started my career at a company called Monterey Provision, from the bottom, worked my way up to the top, and read a book called The Secret in my early 30s, and somehow found myself owning a $30 million in sales food distributor that my team and I scaled 10x to about 300 million over a period of 8 years. And I sold my company to KE in 2016. I worked as a senior leader there for a couple of years before joining Jimbo's as president, and had a lot of fun there, and then moved on to starting Vdriven about 6 years ago, initially investing in emerging brands. I invested in about 12 CPG companies, mostly plant-based at the time. And I was vegan at the time, and that was a really cool place to be investing, although many of those investments never really materialized into much. So thank God I diversified the company, and we do a number of different services in the space today, including deduction management, accounting division. We do consulting for investors in terms of doing due diligence, but also for brands. And we also are a broker to the 70 key natural retailers in America. And we also have another product where we do data deep dives for scaling and mid-sized brands to help them really dig into their data. And some of those learnings that we've had from those deep dives are what led me to where we are today with this presentation. I've also been a professor at the University of San Diego of supply chain in the last couple of years, and I am the host of the Reconnected podcast, which I encourage you to listen to. Had some really amazing guests recently, including the SVP of Whole Foods. So let's keep going here. So today I'll be talking a little bit about just really high level promo marketing spend, making sure I'll be quick on that. That's not the core of what we're talking about. I want to make sure we start from the same place. And then I'll introduce my my new concept, which is RORAS. I'll talk about the idea of velocity versus RORAS, and I'll give you some case studies. And then we'll have tons of space for conversation. I should be done with the presentation within about 25 minutes. So let's go. So some core points to consider around promotional and marketing spend. One of the things I've noticed with early stage brands is, one of our main goals is drive trial, build awareness, get the product into people's mouths. It's often really common to see running TPRs and other types of promos that you have a really decent promotional lift, and then you maintain a nice post-promotional lift. So like there's the pre-velocity or the pre-volume before the promo. There's certainly the promotional volume, and then there's post-promo. And in general, you see if you have a good product at a right price, you'll see that that base volume growing over time after you do each of the TPRs. Also, in-store demonstrations are very powerful. For established brands, a number of our brands fall into this camp where, hey, we're very mature, maybe at a Whole Foods or a Sprouts, and we're running these promos, and we're just not seeing much of a post-promotional lift anymore. So, oftentimes what we're looking at in those cases is how do we do like off-shelf placements? How do we find consumers in new places of the store that maybe we hadn't found them before? But maybe looking for special merchandising opportunities, secondary placements, deeper partnerships with retailers, including their marketing teams. So just I want to make sure the group understands that there really is a difference between early stage and established and mature brands. The other thing too is I want us always to be thinking about the psyche of the category manager. What are they thinking about? And I was talking to Wade, who is one of the most accomplished retailers I know, and he said, "Yeah, it's comp sales, right? It's like, what is my percentage growth? What is my dollars growth in this category?" And so, a category manager, by definition, is going to highly value a brand that grows their comp sales, whether dollars or percentages or both. So just always recognize that. Even when someone's telling you they're focused on innovation and they're just excited to have a new brand, at the end of the day, they have to grow their category. So if we're not doing that, we're going to be at risk eventually. And then they also are held accountable for maintaining and or growing a target gross margin percent or dollars for their category year over year. So that's part of some of the reasons why you find it very hard to negotiate gross margins down with retailers. So this is how they're motivated. And one point I always like to make to people, say we work with a lot of specialty or even super specialty brands, is there is a situation, there are situations when you're talking to retailers because they're often so just velocity focused. But again, they're also focused on growing their comp sales, where you can make the case that a product at $4.99 selling at 4 units per SKU per store per week is not as good as selling a product at $7.99 at 3 units per SKU per store per week. That dollar velocity per week at $24 almost versus $20 is a big deal relative to growing comp sales. So just some thoughts for you guys before we dig into some deeper thoughts on ROAS. And one more thought here is, there's this idea of like, how much do I spend? And this is like the whole crux of our conversation today is I can risk overspending and maybe drive even more velocity than I need to, but I also can overspend in terms of hitting the goal velocity because I didn't do it as efficiently as I could. And so there's this idea of number one is if you haven't asked your category managers what your goal velocity is, I invite you to do that. If we don't know what the target is, we don't know how to hit it. That's kind of the starting point. And then this conversation today will be about how do we avoid the risk of overspending to achieve that target. So let's do it. I'm going to introduce you to ROAS. So the difference between marketing and promotional spending, just again, this is high level stuff. Marketing, I consider that to be more top of the funnel. It's further away from point of purchase. And oftentimes you don't see measurable results immediately. It can take some time. And promotions like TPRs and store coupons and demos are really close to the point of purchase. And we find that emerging brands and scaling brands tend to focus more on the bottom of the funnel. And that's often because doing things in marketing, at least for mini brands, can be really much more expensive. I call it like boiling the ocean sometimes if you're spending for marketing top of the funnel and you really don't have the budget for most brands. So typically we focus on promotions, but we'll dig in further here. So the idea of ROAS, and I'll explain more about what that actually means in a second, is it allows us to compare different marketing and promotional levers on an apples to apples basis. It allows us to make smarter decisions with our limited capital. It allows us to move beyond assumptions and toward accountability for our marketing teams and our sales teams and understand which combination of levers works best. So ROAS essentially allows us to compare an Instacart in terms of efficiency in driving sales versus an Inmar, which would be like digital coupons, or versus TPRs at shelf. So here's the deal. So most brands, at least the brands I've worked with, it's all about velocity. We have that target, right? We're given it by the retailer and it's like, we got to hit that target. And it's like, we hit the target. Oh, great. We hit the velocity target. But did that really make sense, right? Did I really do it efficiently? And many brands I've noticed tend to default to TPRs, often with the same discount amount. But if we started measuring the efficiency of our promotional marketing levers the way e-commerce does, I think e-commerce is amazing in terms of like of how they're able to measure, often through A/B testing, like which lever they're pulling is most effective. And so I've created ROAS as a way for us to be able to have something in the retail space that is equivalent, maybe even better. So ROAS is return on retail ad spend. It's a retail adapted version of ROAS in the online channel. And it's this idea of being able to measure the incremental sales dollars versus the spend that I made. So going a little bit deeper, ROAS equals the total lever. So a lever could be like a TPR, or a campaign could be like a TPR in demos. So the incremental revenue driven by the lever or the campaign in dollars divided by the total campaign cost. So in this example, the incremental revenue was $50,000. The total campaign cost 7,500. So my ROAS is 6.7. So that means that for every dollar spent in my campaign cost, I generated $6.70 in incremental revenue. That's beautiful, right? And we want to do that all day. So it's something that I've never heard brands really talk about this way, and I'd like to change the way we do that in retail to be more of what I'm talking about right now. And I want to go into this a little bit deeper. When I think about ROAS versus ROAS, and ROAS in the online channel, you're oftentimes taking all the dollar revenue generated from a campaign. In retail, we can't really identify like which customers were new, which ones were existing, but we can look at incremental growth in units or dollars, right? So there's like this idea of like I'm before a promotion or before a campaign, I have a base velocity. During a promo, I have this incremental increase being driven by the campaign. And then I have a post-promotional volume that ideally is higher than the pre because people liked my product. And so what I'm really thinking about in ROAS is the little green parts of these bars, right? Is the incremental sales dollars. And that's a core difference between ROAS and ROAS. It's based on incremental dollars versus total dollars. Let's keep on going. So I was on a bike ride the other day, just thinking about like what is the difference between velocity as a metric and ROAS. And so velocity is like this performance metric. It represents how well a product is selling on the shelf, right? And it's the metric that our customers thinking about. But it doesn't mean it's the metric that we have to run our company around so much. I think ROAS is. ROAS is the efficiency metric, and it measures the efficiency of our retail, promotional, and marketing spends. And certainly, if we're efficient and we're achieving the performance metric of velocity, that's good. And so why both metrics matter, velocity shows the outcome. It's what our retailers care about, while ROAS shows the efficiency of achieving that outcome. So I want to relate it back to school. I think we all have a base experience with school, right? And this idea of like, I got an A on my report card, and great. But did I invest 40 hours to achieve the A? Was I efficient in my studying? Or did I spend 400 hours on getting my A, right? So the goal obviously would be to spend 40 hours to achieve the A instead of spending the 400. There's no reason to celebrate that I spent 400 hours. Like this is the same person ideally, right? If I could spend 40 versus 400, I want to spend the 40. The same thing when I'm thinking about my promotional spending, right? I want to be doing the least amount of spend to create the most amount of incremental dollars or units lift. So why efficiency matters. I think this is pretty obvious, but I want to go through it so we can all internalize it. Is efficiency matters because maximizing returns on limited marketing budgets is crucial for growth. It helps identify which tactics to deliver the best bang for the buck. So as you're looking at different campaigns, and this is the way they do it in online channel, right? They go, hey, I did an A/B test. And relating it back to retail, I tried a TPR at $1 off, and then I tried a TPR at 50 cents off, and then did a demo with it. Which would have the better results? And we would determine that certainly by how many units you sold, but the efficiency metrics is my ROAS metrics. How many incremental units did I drive for the dollars I invested? There's also this idea of diminishing returns. There's no single tactic that can be infinitely scaled. It's not like I want to do TPRs every single day and do them at $3 off instead of $2 off, and I'll just get crazy returns. It doesn't work that way. It's the idea of, and I think that I just talk about it here, of a well-rounded stew, right? The stew has carrots and celery, and ours might have TPRs, and it's going to have demos, and it's going to have Instacart. And it's this idea of like really putting these together and creating this stew, if you will, in a way that delivers the most efficient way of achieving that goal velocity number, which is measured through ROAS. So let's make this real. So let's take this company, Sunroot, this fictitious company. They're year four in retail. They're in independents, regionals, Sprouts, and Whole Foods. They have no internal sales analysis, uncertain which promotions really drive velocity. And so this is a graph, and this graph is inspired by one of my clients recently that I was referring to earlier, where we were doing promotions, like this case, dollar off TPRs, and we just were not seeing the lifts, right? They weren't happening. So we were seeing, yes, we're seeing a promotional lift, right? But we're not seeing that blue bar should be ideally going up over time as I'm claiming more consumers. There could be things going on here, including my price point could not be ideal when I'm not on promo, or the packaging might not be doing the job. But in this case, I'm really focused on these like TPR and other levers I can pull to drive velocity efficiently. So what we did in this is the fictitious example, but I'm going to show you some different ideas. So one is like, hey, what if we tried, and this is where you're testing, right? A/B testing, a dollar TPR plus 20 demos. We did a $2 TPR, a $1 TPR, and no demos, a 50-cent TPR plus digital coupon. And you can see the different promo costs here, the incremental units. I'll skip customer acquisition costs for the moment and focus on ROAS. But the dollar TPR plus 20 demos gives us a really low ROAS, right? So it's not necessarily the most efficient way to get there. Maybe we needed to do it because we just had to hit those units. But if I look down here, my 50-cent TPR plus digital coupon had a ROAS of 8.2. So for every one of the dollars I spent, I generated $8.20 of incremental sales growth. And so that would be really exciting for me to know. If I could achieve that, and I drove a little bit more than half of the incremental units of the most expensive in terms of like lowest ROAS. So, but maybe next time I'll layer on something else. Maybe I layer on Instacart, or layer on digital coupons or more digital coupons, a bigger spend there. So I'm constantly trying to look at different campaigns that I've done. And oftentimes we need to look at a specific retailer because our level of maturity and what works with that retailer can be different. But over time, ideally, I've kind of built up all this data and I've learned which approach of my campaign to drive incremental unit growth has the highest ROAS, right? So it's $8.20 per dollar spent on the promo. Go to the next slide. So this is the idea of the testing different things over a 2-year period. This is looking at 2025, 2026. The dashed line here is helping us to see how much my incremental or I guess post-promotional lifts, if you will, are really sustaining. So that blue bar ideally is growing, and it's not growing much here. You can see on this side, it's grown more. And this is us testing a dollar TPR, $2 off TPR, a 50-cent off TPR and coupon, dollar off TPR plus demos. And what we did, and based on the prior slide, is we learned, hey, you know what? These 50-cent off TPRs plus coupon were the best ROAS for us. So let's just run those. And you can see that they were very effective in this case study in driving a better increase in base velocity than the old approach, right? And so we did 50 cents off 3 times and then a dollar off plus demos, and it did the most for us. So I think what I'm really trying to get us to think about here as an industry is, okay, yeah, I could pull these same levers, get the same results, or I could try different things, start learning which approaches and which forms of the stew, if you will, which ingredients I'm throwing in there, which levers I'm pulling, give me the best and most efficient route to achieving the goal of velocity for that retailer. So yes, for Sunroot, velocity can increase without burning cash. So it's like the example of how many hours I spent studying to achieve the A, right? Like I want to spend the least amount to achieve that goal. The 50-cent TPR plus digital coupon had the best result, had the highest ROAS. A $2 TPR was totally not the right way to go, had the lowest ROAS. And that's often the case. We often find when we run those deeper promotions, unless you go maybe to a BOGO level, we're just not seeing the return on that you would hope for, at least in sustained post-promotional lift. And demos can be expensive, and I want to dig into this a little bit more. This idea of like when I think about post-promotional lift, even for a TPR, like how far do I think about it? And I was talking to Wade about it. And typically for a TPR or promotion at shelf, I'm thinking of 6 weeks after the promotion. For a demo, for us, we've learned, hey, looking at it even a few months out, depending on the type of product, can be really valuable. So, this is the idea of a demo. This is the same demo, $4,000 cost. This is the incremental units that we drove during the demo, but then looking at post-demo lift in this example, looking at 3 months, um, we drove 900 total from that investment. And so our ROAS looks a little different for every dollar we spent on the campaign. When we look at not just the demo itself, but the demo and post-demo lift, that can be $1.10 for every dollar invested. It's still not outstanding in this case, right? But it's just I wanted to really get you thinking about like how long do we look after a promotion has happened to determine the true ROAS of that event. I also want to note that oftentimes we're going to layer things over each other. So it's very difficult to achieve perfection in my ROAS calculations, but I think we can get fairly accurate. Let's move on. And this is another idea too. Like I've been asked, could you do ROAS on Instacart? And certainly, with ROAS, they will give you a metric and tell you, hey, this is what you sold. Here is your new to brand sales. You know what you spent with Instacart and you know what the new to brand sales are. So then you can calculate ROAS in this example at $3.40 per dollar spent. That's a decent ROAS. Let's get Golden Grits. Year 8 in retail, Whole Foods, Publix, Wegmans, Unify and KeHE, plateauing velocity, bloated promo calendar, margin strain. The margin is killing them and they're trying to raise capital. So they're like, okay, we need to dig into this and figure out what's going on. So there's just something to think about here. Like this is blended gross margin over a year and thinking about maybe one of the retailers, right? So not on promo, we'd be earning, if we did no promos for the whole year, we'd earn a 50% gross margin. If you do an EDLP, we'd hit a 32% gross margin. If you do EDLP plus quarterly promos, it'd be 22, which makes sense, right? I always love that when we do an EDLP and we have to do promos too. It's like not really a true EDLP in that case, is it? And then we have a quarterly dollar off promos. It gives us a 40% gross margin. And then so that's 4 times a year versus $6 times a year, drops it to 35%. So the other part too is like looking at various retailers. So we could look at different retailers, right? This could be like Whole Foods and Sprouts and Fresh Time and Fresh Market. And we can look at the various ROASs for trade spend. So like in retailer A, if we're having a 10% trade spend based on sales, and we're having a 3.2 ROAS, that's pretty good. For every dollar of ad trade spend, we're generating $3.20 in ROAS. And I'm curious if anyone else has ever experienced this, but like retailer D, where we're spending a lot more on trade spend. This happens a lot in conventional. I'm spending a lot more on trade spend, 30%, and my ROAS is 20 cents per every dollar spent, right? So it's like, oh gosh, you may have to do that. The retailer may require it, so be it. But it's something for us to be really mindful of like, okay, well, this retailer D, maybe TPRs aren't the way to go. Maybe we need to look at digital coupons or maybe it's social nature or go to aisle or it's just this idea of like looking at this and looking at ROAS by a retailer can help us start thinking about, okay, like I maybe need to take a different approach because this isn't really working. It's not efficient relative to achieving my goal velocity. Okay. And then let's see here. This is the example of Golden Grits continued. Again, we have that base velocity line from the beginning, and the goal is to see the blue bar going above that dotted line, meaning their base velocity is growing. That consumers are trying the product, they're liking it, they're sticking. And this idea here is the promo spend before was 30%. I believe is this retailer D idea. So we're trying to make the retailer D idea work better, where we're just TPRing the heck out of things, right? So promotions at shelf looks like 7 times a year. After we do TPRs 4 times a year, we're doing Instacart, influencer outreach, third-party merchandisers, and just 4 TPRs, and we're building that base velocity better. That blue line goes above the dotted line, and that is a win. Promo spend drops from 30% to 12%. I'm going to cough for 1 second.
You're still muted there, Luke. And the presentation went away. You're still muted.
When I shift my screen, it always seems to do
There
that.
we go.
So,
There we go.
okay, let's go to present. Okay, so golden grits example here. So no meaningful drop in velocity, and you can save more money. Actually, we had an increase in velocity by using the alternative approach. You can declutter your promo calendar, and this is the idea of having strategic partnerships with your retailers and say, hey, you may want some in promos, but it's not working. Let me show you what's going on here. I mean, I've had this discussion with the retailers in the past where it's like, I know you want me to do this, but let me show you what's going on. Like, yeah, we're having promotional lift, but I'm not seeing post-promotional lift. This doesn't benefit you or me. Over time, we need to claim more consumers to our product line. And I'm being a bit more intense than I would be with a category manager, but that would be the general idea. Um, let's see. Yeah, this idea of mature brands need to use data to cut noise, not just spend more. I've seen too many brands like, oh, like we're not growing our velocity. Let's do more TPRs. Like, well, maybe that isn't the right way to do it, right? And this idea of ROAS and looking at the efficiency to drive velocity, I think can help us have more discipline in how we show up.
Hey, Luke, there's a question here that rather than wait to the end, I think it would be
Yeah,
good to hit now. The question is, are you including Instacart fees, etc., in your calculated promo spend?
yeah, exactly. Yes, 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 yes. So, go back to all the way back
I didn't
here.
see a place to sit. There might be a place
Oh,
around the corner.
I think someone may need to, Sarah, I think you maybe need to mute. I know you're out of infra today. Um, yeah, so I want to be clear that the total campaign costs when calculating ROAS should include all costs related to that campaign. So any costs related to Instacart need to be captured here. And then whatever that incremental revenue, again, with Instacart, it's really easy. It's almost like D2C, right? In terms of how we can operate. So it's incremental revenue driven by that cost. Did they answer the question, Wade?
Yep.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, so let's go down here. So like, what do you do now? Get data. For those people that do not have the budget for Spins or Nielsen, Whole Foods and Wegmans are amazing. Wegmans actually gives you the data for you and your competitors in the set. Whole Foods gives you your data. And so if you have you have one of those or both those accounts, you can definitely be testing this out. You could also, I mean, in a less exact way, you could leverage your KeHE data and look for sell-in data from KeHE into the retailer, and you should see a spike during a promo. You kind of know what you spent on that promo, and then you kind of know what the lift was, at least with what the retailer was bringing in. Not as accurate, but we do that for clients, and it can at least give you directionally where you're headed. And certainly Spins and Nielsen give you really good data. I also highly recommend, and a number of brands we work with, we lead a 2 to 3 hour monthly deep dive. You really just have to dig into the data. I think it's a hugely important and underrated discipline of getting the team together for 2 to 3 hours. Usually it's marketing and sales. We're going through this kind of channel report card. How are we doing in natural? How are we doing in conventional? How are we doing in mass? We're doing a deeper dive into the major accounts. Like, how are we doing overall? How are we, how are our promotions performing? And ideally, I said down here, we're doing like a ROAS analysis, and we're starting to share that data internally and like what's working. And again, because that ROAS includes marketing and sales driven promotional activity, it's great to have a whole team there. We also dig into void analysis and distributor performance reviews. That's an rated one as well. I had lunch with the VP of a key natural retailer the other day, and so one of the biggest gaps he sees is that we often expect KeHE and Unify and other distributors just to show up well, and we as brands, and in my case broker, and we need to step up more and be much more aware of how our distributors are performing, ideally weekly, if not daily, and raising up to the retailer and to the distributor when there's problems with those distributors. We need to be looking at that, certainly deeper dive on a monthly basis, but also looking at it more often to really show up. So question and answers. I will stop sharing my screen so we have space for questions and answers.
Great. Okay. Well, we got our first one, and again, I welcome any to put any questions you have in the chat. If you want to verbalize and you want to come on camera, we can do that as well, but happy to do it via chat. The first one, Luke, comes from Laura Jackson, and she says, the elephant in the room might be OIs because there's an expense that may or may not be passed along, but the
Yes.
cost is still there, causing a mismeasure of true ROAS. Can you speak at all to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So number one is when for brands we work with, we highly recommend that you not do more than one OI per year. Especially if you have a long shelf life product, right? Because it leads to bridge buying, and it can be. I, I'd I would just say if you could get away with none, you would do none, because you really lose complete control, especially for a long shelf life product. In terms of calculating ROAS, it's also really hard because you don't control if every retailer is even going to put it on promotion. You don't even know. Essentially, it's like this gift to the distributor, right, to help their margin, which is important to keep them in business. But it's almost impossible to really calculate what your results would be, and that's why just sharing candidly with you on OIs, like you're going to get pressured to do them, and I think there's other ways to help support the distributor than just giving them the ability to bridge buy your product, where they buy in 3 months worth of product and they only get the promotion for 1 month. It's just really not beneficial to you as a brand.
And she has a follow-up question. Michelle, I'm going to get to your question here in a minute. But Laura had a follow-up question that she just learned without an additional scan, you don't always get a shelf tag. And Luke, I can
Yeah,
actually answer that one if you'd like. So,
please.
I would say from a scan, typically if you're offering a scan to a retailer, and I should share, I don't typically share my background, but prior to joining Vdriven, I've had a 20-year career on the retailer side, including my last role as a vice president for the fresh market over their center store. But typically, if you're giving a retailer a scan, that's a touched relationship, right? And so you if you have that relationship with the retailer, you should have an idea if they're going to perform on shelf and what the requirements are to perform on shelf. So in my past, oftentimes, if it was 15% or less, we weren't going to touch it. Meaning we weren't generating a shelf tag because from a retailer perspective, anytime you have a TPR, there's work involved. There's new shelf tags generated. There's the labor associated with hanging the new shelf tag, tearing the old one down, etc. So I as a retailer am going to try and be as efficient as possible on the operations side in that if I'm not getting, in most cases, it was 20% or higher, I'm not going to execute on shelf. And that was kind of the line in the sand we drove. But relative to that, Luke, what would you say as far as without that additional scan and not getting a tag, as far as actual ensuring execution? How would you answer that?
Yeah, so number one is I think there's an assumption that, oh, I did the OI, people are going to run it. And when you and I used to work at Jimbo's, and we would select which OIs to actually pass through, which ones to basically add to our margin. So
Right.
the best way to make sure that happened would be to work with your category manager, make sure you're submitting the form, make sure there's a commitment from that retailer to execute. This is why I don't believe in OIs, right? Because for you to touch every retailer is very difficult to pull that off. And I would rather do what, imagine everybody agrees on this call. I'd rather do a scan whenever I can. MCBs are expensive. They appear to be more expensive than OIs, but I believe in the end, MCBs, if you have to use them, if the scan is not available, it's gonna be a better way to go. You will save money and you'll have better execution when you're doing an MCB with a submitted promo form to a retailer.
Right. Okay. We're going to go back to Michelle's question. When looking at data, what timeframes are you evaluating?
Yeah, very good. So I was commenting on this earlier, and it's really important. And you can use whatever you want. But for me, I find for TPRs, I look at the promotional lift during the promotional period, and I'm looking at 6 weeks after. Some people look at 4, some people look at 8. You can choose what's best for you. For demos, I like to look at a month or two. You might have to adjust it if you're starting to overlap various different levers and promos and marketing activities. You may need to look at a tighter window, which will give you a more conservative ROAS. But if you start overlapping too much, then the data gets wonky, right? Because you don't know what's really driving it. With Instacart, I look at Instacart in a couple of ways. Like what's happening during I claiming new consumers. I spent this much money, and now I claim this many new consumers, right? And this many more dollars are generated. But I could also look at it over time and say, did those customers actually stick? And so Instacart, so the more conservative measure is what happened during the Instacart promo, right? When I was paying for it, when I got those new consumers. And then if I want to be a bit more liberal with it, I could say, well, what happens over the next 4 to 6 weeks? Do those customers actually like my product? Do they stick? And do they really drive that incremental ongoing sales for me? So so I think it's nuanced, and it's something that for the clients that work with us doing this, we kind of talk about, here's our assumptions, here's how we're going to approach it, and we can adapt it over time based on actual experience.
Yeah, and I think just as important as we talk about that post analysis is that pre-analysis too. So it's the whole picture. So what are you doing before the
Yep.
promotion? What are you doing during the promotional
Mhm.
activity? And how what's happening after? So all
Yeah.
that is kind of in the equation there.
It's if you remember that graph, it's the green bar, right? It's that incrementality we're measuring in that ROAS calculation I was talking about.
Right. Okay. Next
Incremental
question.
over base. Yep.
Next question is from Willie. Why is it bad to overshoot on the minimum velocity via promos other than having to spend more than we'd like, especially if we're getting good ROAS?
Yeah, if you're getting good ROAS, fantastic. My point would be if you way overshoot what you need to be doing, and let's say the average velocity in your set is 6 and you're hitting 10, and that's great. And it's also going to be a great story for other retailers too, probably. But if I'm overspending and now I'm hitting 15, then I'm wondering if that return really makes sense for the spend. So I think you said in your question, except for maybe spending more, right? Well, many of us operate on limited budgets, and we have to spread that budget in a very judicious way, in a very strategic way, to make sure that we are winning everywhere. That we're trying to, but I want at Whole Foods and Sprouts and Fresh Time and Fresh Market. So if you have unlimited spending, and as long as the ROAS is there, to your point, then why not, right? My point also is that eventually the ROAS will start to go down with just TPRs. There's an inflection point in which more dollars spent start giving you fewer and fewer incrementality of dollars.
And I think the other thing, again, looking at it from a retailer side, is one of the things you have to consider is that promotional spend sustainable? Because as Luke mentioned early on in the presentation, I can absolutely confirm category managers and buyers are graded on year over year increases with sales and gross margin
That's true
and gross
too.
dollars. And so if you have a killer promotion
True.
this year, but next year your world changes, whether it's you don't have the promotional money or even if you don't have the inventory to support that same promotion, you somehow, some way have to figure out how to cover that gap of that fantastic promotion you did this year. And so it's something to always keep in mind that your promotions are sustainable, and sustainable meaning you can have that same spend the following year, right? In somehow, some fashion,
That's
because
that's
you're
a
going to have to
yes,
make up that
yes.
volume, and that, so when you start thinking of BOGOs and things like that, think of the back of your head, okay, how am I going to repeat these numbers next year? Because that's going to be the expectation, and just so keep that in the back of your mind.
But by the way, Wade, that is so true. And I've actually heard category managers like about their whole category say, I don't want to grow too much this year because the expectation is going to be I do it again next year. So they
Right.
actually try to and some retailers try to moderate that.
The worst analogy I can give you, but in this case it's very applicable, is that when all of us were doing fantastic during COVID, and numbers were going up, 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 they weren't comparing us to before COVID. COVID, in a sense, think of
Mhm.
it from a retail perspective,
Yeah.
was like this massive promotion because our numbers, everyone's numbers were through the roof.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? The baseline didn't go back here. The expectation was, okay, how are we growing, growing, growing? No one wanted to
Mhm.
hear that COVID influenced sales. It was like, well, how are we growing this year? So
Yeah.
it's a good relation to promotional spend. We have a couple comments from Dave. I'm gonna throw both at you and let you respond.
Good.
Not all retailers, especially smaller retailers, won't support scans, only MCBs.
Yep, of course.
MCBs are
Yep.
more expensive due to billing at wholesale costs and
Yep.
not retailer landed costs. And then he says OIs will work if and only if you have a great broker team that coordinates all A, B, and co-op groups in your individual promotional calendars by retailer.
I think everything said there is absolutely true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you're able to do an OI and you're able to, whether you do it internally or through your broker, get everything submitted to every retailer and get confirmation, then that's great. But it doesn't fix though What it doesn't fix is for a longer shelf life product, the bridge buying over multiple months. That is still the Achilles heel of this, guys. Like I don't care if I get everything perfect. I'm still facing the bridge buying challenge. And I think that's something that I'm really worried about. And I just for the group to understand this idea of build back at wholesale cost, that's right. I mean, an OI is 15% off or 20% off of what I'm charging K here, Unify, right? A MCB is oftentimes your landed cost into the distributor marked up 40% and your discount is from that. And so that's where, and then there's a processing fee too, right? So it can be expensive. And you're right, not everyone offers scans. My point is that everybody should be asking for to do a scan where it exists, and then MCB secondarily. And if you're doing OI is great. I mean, that's totally your choice. Just recognize that if you have a long shelf life product, you just may face some bridge buying that could negate, the value of the OI.
And bridge buying can happen on both the distributor side as well as the retailer side, because I've worked in both specialty
That's
and
true.
conventional retail,
Good point.
where one of my jobs was to bridge buy, and we call it forward buying. But absolutely,
I
yeah.
didn't realize retailers did that. They actually do bridge buy?
I've worked for a very
Huh.
small retailer that bridge bought, and a very a mid-sized retailer that bought, and in
Okay.
some cases, my goal was to buy 4 to 6 weeks worth of inventory,
Mhm.
and just for pure profit. It was just to pad our margin. So
That's amazing. So that's why, okay, so then going back for anyone that's maybe newer to the industry on this call, um, that's where scans are great because scans is done right is literally what's scanning through the register. There's no benefit to anyone of bridge buying, whether it's the retailer or the distributor in the case of a scan.
right. Next question is from Yanni. First of all, I applaud this effort, and this is definitely the way we need to evaluate trade spend. However, it can be challenging to determine the incremental revenue attributable to trade spend,
It
especially
can
when
be.
you're doing more than one strategy in a single retailer. Can you discuss this challenge and how you would address it?
Yeah, I like the idea of thinking of it as opposed to like the single lever of a TPR, because most people are doing more than just a TPR. I'm doing an Instacart, so I look at it as more as the whole campaign. So within a campaign, I'm doing a $2 TPR, I'm doing Instacart, I might do a social nature, I might do like for that campaign and that approach, what happened? It's almost like I talked about the stew, like what results did I get from that stew over this period of time. And let me try. And so you have to be pretty intentional about this, right? This is this stew that's going to be for 2 months. And now I'm doing another stew that's going to be with these different ingredients. And how did these different stews do? Question is like, which part of the stew performed well, right? And so it's like, well, I may not be precise, but I can know that one stew did better than the other. And I can then maybe start trying to make slight changes to that stew until I get it perfect. And I look at that as being in like the online channel, and I'm A/B testing constantly. My 29-year-old son, he owns a marketing company. This is all he does every day is he's A/B testing different approaches. The difference to me is the time spans. He's doing it in a day or a week, the A/B testing. We're doing it over, a quarter, one quarter to another quarter, right? And we're doing it over a span of years. So it's not something that's going to be as the feedback loop won't be as quick and it won't be as precise, but I think we can be a lot more precise than we've been being in the past as an industry.
Great. Okay, next question is from Swati. Great information, Luke. Is the 50% gross margin manufacturing margin, or does it include other expense items?
Yeah.
1 second, we get a little bit more there. My screen just rolled down.
Okay.
Other expense items. Different accounting professionals have different opinions about it. It's hard for many startups to get to 50% gross margin for manufacturing,
Mm.
especially in frozen space. What's your
Yeah.
advice?
Yeah. Okay. I have very clear thoughts on this. So number one is there's a difference between gross margin and product margin. Product margin is just literally this is, what I sell it for, the gross sales, and this is what it costs me. I don't take into account channel spend, promotions, marketing, anything else. What I have found as a general rule, and it varies by department, is that a brand that is earning a 55% product margin, that might be a gross margin at the end of 35%, right? After all the channel costs and promotions. But a 55% product margin is generally enough for a brand to be sustainably profitable without raising capital. That said, the line of death where you may not be profitable, you might be crazy profitable, but you're not going to lose a lot, is that a 45% product margin in general is enough for a brand to be able to continue to exist, even though I couldn't raise money or a lot of money over time. So those are the general ideas. And then in terms of promotional and trade spend, so that's between the gross sales line and the net sales line, and I won't spend too much time because this gets too granular. I want to spend in an ideal world, I'm spending about 16% for my cost of working with KeHE, plus my cost of all my promotions, my TPRs would be about 16% of my gross sales. So anyone wants to go deeper on that discussion, I'm happy to, because I have a lot of opinions on it.
Right. Okay. Next question is from Ron Lewis. Could you comment on promo marketing budgets that should be established for manufacturers?
Comment on promo marketing budgets. Can you help me maybe wait on that one a little bit?
My guess is, and Ron, feel free to expand on that, but my guess is talking about whether it's a percentage of, or something along those lines. So like, when I'm looking at my annual plan, what should I be looking at from a promo and marketing spend?
Yeah, got it. So typically, but I think again, I'm going back to what I just talked about between gross sales and net sales, which is my channel costs of working with my distributors in general, and then my costs of working my TPR costs. That's generally going to be, if I can be 16%, I'm being really good. I see a lot of brands at 22%, but those brands tend to be funded with VC money or angel money. If I'm not funded, I've got to keep that to 16% or less. It has to be really efficient. And this goes back to where ROAS can be helpful and help you understand what's efficient and what's not efficient. In terms of marketing spend, this is where I'm really challenging emerging and scaling brands today, and even larger brands. I look at brands like a Coconut Cult or a client of ours, Vdriven. Their ability to drive amazing marketing activities while spending almost $0 is wild. They're just literally talking into their phones, sharing the story of growing their company. And, in the case of Veggie Bites, like millions and millions of people are following them. And Coconut Cult's tens of millions of people without needing to spend money. So I would say on my side, when I'm consulting the brands, I really am challenging them to not go out and spend crazy money on marketing. Outside of demos and other things, right, that we do, but doing very top of the funnel social media, I think that should be the brand telling their story where that's possible.
Great. Okay. Next question from Dave. In your experience, are demos an effective spend versus the associated costs? Success is based on foot traffic during a particular window.
Yeah, that's such an interesting one, right? So I used to own a national demo in-store demonstration company called Direct Demos. We were dedicated to Sprouts originally and expanded, and it was the hardest business I could ever imagine starting, and I should not have done it. If I wasted so much time and effort, that the ROAS, the ROI of that business sucked. The challenge with demos, for a demo company, is that you have to every month almost like sell the next month out, and you start from scratch. And the problem you have for as a demo person is what kind of quality of people are you really able to get in mass when 1 week I work 5 hours or 4 hours, the next week I work 16, and the next week I work 40. And it really doesn't lend itself to having the highest quality of performance for your brand. So what we highly recommend for brands that work with us is like, you as founder and all of your friends to get them out doing demos. I typically do not like spending money on demos, but when you do hire a demo company, I recommend that you choose like have them do 3 or 4 demos near your home base. Go audit those demos, see how they're showing up, verify that the sales they're giving you of how many items they sold are accurate, because they can make those numbers up, right? So I'm just, as a person who's owned a demo company, I just would say, really, really maybe trust, but always verify that the quality is there, because it's extremely, extremely hard for a demo company to actually pull this off and do it well.
And it's probably good advice for any service provider, truth be told. So, okay, next question I think is from Yanni again. And I have some thoughts, but I'd like to hear what you have to say, Luke. Is a category manager typically looking for a brand to perform at velocities higher than the category average, or just higher than the worst performers? In other words, if he has spins data showing the velocity of each brand in the category at a given retailer, where do I want my velocity to rank among the list of brands?
Yeah, very good. It's so important to me that we always ask the category manager, what is your goal velocity for me? right? And so I don't want to ascertain it from looking at spins data. I want to always ask the category manager. I want them to tell me. And I want to make sure, where I can, I exceed that by 20% because I've had cases where I hit the target and I still lost, right? And they say, oh, something changed, some new brand came in. I want to make sure I'm out overperforming that velocity target that they gave me to make sure that I have the least probability of being kicked off shelf. It doesn't guarantee anything, right? But it lowers that risk. Wade, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I was going to say I don't disagree with that. The only thing that I was going to add on is something we were talking about before we started the recording. Is that we have a
Oh, I think Matthew needs to be muted.
Matthew, you need to be muted there, buddy.
There, we got him. We got
Thank
him.
you. Okay. We started talking about this before we went on, and I think there's a very, very fine balance with velocity and dollar contribution, right? And so if I know just organically that my brand is, let's just say for discussion's sake, maybe 50 cents or 20% higher than the other brands in the category, I'm going to make a play to my category manager that my brand is, the velocities might be a little bit lighter, but it's contributing more dollars to the category because it's a premium brand and so on and so forth. So I think there's a fine balance to velocity, and it's very important. But you also, as I told Luke before we went on the air, dollars pay the bills, right? And whether that's gross margin contribution, percent's great, but dollars pay the bills, and the same applies on the sales side. Everybody looks at units, velocities are good, but at the end of the day, sales dollars pay the bills. So that's the case that I'm making if my dollars aren't, or I'm sorry, my units velocities aren't quite where they want to be. I think it's important to look at it that way. So we're wrapping up here, Luke. We've got about 5 minutes left. Anything on your end to put a bow on this?
I love that. I love the questions, by the way. I think they're great, and I really just want to make sure that if anybody has any questions on this ROAS concept, I really would, feel free to email me, message me. I'll bring up something on the screen here that will give you a QR code that can help you get in contact. I just I think we have to stop just saying, oh, I hit the velocity target and understand, did we do it efficiently or as efficiently as we could? And I want to acknowledge the comment about like, well, it's really difficult. I agree because we're often pulling many levers, and I do think if we look at it as this stew over a period of time, and it's like, did this stew work? Did it resonate? Was it efficient with the ROAS metric? I think we're gonna be on the right track.
Great. And just to kind of wrap things up on my side, again, we do these master classes once a month. I'm told, Luke, and I don't know if you know this yet, but I'm told that our next master class, we're more than likely going to be talking about D2C to retail.
Oh, perfect.
I'm giving you a month to prepare for that, Luke, and I'll show up and ask you questions and ask questions from the audience. But kidding aside, this is something Vdriven as an organization does on a monthly basis. It's our way of kind of building the community, and we encourage you to attend and share within your network just as we share within ours. Beyond that, I haven't asked Luke for permission to do this either, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. We have a product that we sell on our consulting side of the business, which is a 3-hour deep dive. And typically that's with Luke, although it could be with another member of our team. It's a 3-hour strategy session where we get into ROI. We talk about SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and really get into the weeds with you on your business and where you're at, and kind of looking at a roadmap for the future. And we offer that service on our consulting side, and I'm going to offer a $500 discount off that 3-hour deep dive strategy session. If you're interested in that, you can, again, scan that code and mention that you are interested in a deep dive and you attended the masterclass, and we'll offer that $500 discount off our regular price on that service. And happy to again, answer any questions. As Luke mentioned, a large part of my day is spent talking to brands about our services and how we might be able to help support you, whether it's on our deduction management, on our accounting side, on our consulting, or our brokerage side. So love for you to scan the code and reach out and touch base with us and how we might be able to help support your growth and your business. I think that's everything. And just one last time, I want to thank Luke for the presentation. Then I also want to mention that Again, Luke hosts a Reconnected podcast. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts by searching Reconnected. And I think that's it for today, Luke, unless I missed anything.
No,